This is CBC Vancouver News.
Escalating tensions as Indigenous youth demonstrators block traffic near the Vancouver port. Plus,
give us the information as quickly as you can.
Identifying COVID-19 safety gaps in BC schools and the plan to deploy rapid response teams. Also,
I certainly hope that other families can be helped by these efforts.
in her first media interview, the mother of two young girls murdered by their father welcomes changes to Canada's Divorce Act. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Dan is off tonight. Well, there were some tense moments between protesters and police after a 24-hour blockade by a group of Indigenous youth who call themselves the Braided Warriors. They temporarily blocked and forced the shutdown of a major intersection near the Port of Vancouver. And as Mira Baines reports, a handful were arrested in order for the road to reopen.
Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe!
About 75 protesters stood their ground at a port blockade in East Vancouver. Vancouver police officers arrived and some people left the intersection, but not all. VPD says 4 adults were arrested for mischief and intimidation by blocking a roadway. They were then released from custody. The group, the Braided Warriors, had lit a sacred fire Tuesday night at Clark and Hastings, blocking the roadway to the Port of Vancouver.
We are here demanding for our brother Stacey Gallagher to be released in a good way. We don't want any more arrests. We are not criminals. This is a waste of taxpayer dollars. Horgan and Kennedy Stewart, please resign if you don't have an economic plan to go forward.
The group says it wants charges against Indigenous land defenders to be dropped. One of them is Stacey Gallagher. He was sentenced to 90 days in jail on Tuesday for violating a court injunction at a Trans Mountain site in Burnaby. Gallagher is appealing the conviction and showed up at the protest tonight.
That we have our dear loved ones doing this, and I'll support them.
Protesters moved the blockade and started clearing the intersection at around 7 o'clock tonight. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Great Gap debate over vaccines appears to be settled tonight. A national advisory panel has endorsed BC's plan to delay second doses of COVID-19 vaccines. As the CBC's Tanya Fletcher explains, this seems to be vindication of the delay plan for BC's top doctor.
This national panel agrees with Dr. Bonnie Henry on the 4-month delay between doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, and it validates her decision to do so here in BC. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization is Canada's independent expert panel on vaccinations, and it was their opinion many provinces were waiting for. You'll remember on Monday, Dr. Henry announced a bold and surprising move to widen the window between doses from 42 days to 4 months. Criticism was quick to mount, including from Canada's chief science advisor, who claimed it amounted to a population-level experiment. But Dr. Henry defended her decision by pointing to emerging scientific data, and she did allude to this agreement from NACI. Well, today NACI publicly sided with BC's rationale, noting early months of real-world effectiveness show sustained high levels of protection after just 1 dose. Now, in the context of limited vaccine supply, NACI is now also formally recommending extending the interval to 4 months to get more people immunized more quickly. There was no 3 o'clock briefing today, but we did catch up with BC's health minister for reaction. He's pleased, though not surprised.
What it allows us to do is to provide more protection more quickly based on the science of the BC CDC and in Quebec and in the United Kingdom and in Israel and around the world. And I think it's the right decision. It allows us to extend protection to more people more quickly.
Now, if the 4-month shift takes effect this month, NACI suggests 80% of Canadians could receive their first shot by the end of June. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
After concerns were raised by parents and teachers about variants of the virus, BC is sending rapid response teams into schools. They'll be there to help identify gaps in COVID-19 safety plans to help reduce exposure risk. But as Andrea Ross reports, some experts say there's no reason to panic about virus transmission in our schools.
Dean McGee had a bad feeling when he saw a message from his kid's school this morning.
My first thought was, is this another exposure letter?
It wasn't this time, but he's gotten used to COVID-19 exposures at his kids' schools.
So now, when you see a message from the school, your first thought is probably, I wonder what's going on with COVID at the school.
More than half a dozen entire classrooms are in isolation in the Fraser Health District due to exposures, and more than 180 cases of variants have been identified in BC so far. Yesterday, Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry said the province is watching schools closely.
Where we see transmission increasing in school-aged children is when they're not in school.
That's why with spring break around the corner, McGee is hoping things don't get worse.
I hope there isn't the kind of COVID fatigue where people feel like they need to get out and travel and mingle. It's the mingling part that I don't want to see.
The province is funding 6 new rapid response teams to work with BC schools to improve safety plans. One expert says moves like isolating entire classrooms and mass testing are a good call.
It seems like Fraser Health is actually being really transparent and really proactive around this issue and really taking a lot of steps, going above and beyond what they might have been doing for regular COVID around variants of concern.
Because the variant is more transmissible, she says everyone needs to be on guard, not just schools.
The fact that it's rising and it's likely to be the predominant type of COVID in BC in the coming weeks, that's a concern for all of us.
Mass vaccinations are on the horizon, but rising cases of variants of concern could make things tougher in the meanwhile. It's why health officials say we can't let our guard down yet.
Right now, while we have the hope and the inspiration of our vaccination campaigns going on, we need people to follow public health orders.
That means staying home from school or work when sick and getting tested right away if you have any symptoms. Andrea Ross, CBC News, Vancouver.
Across the province, another 18 new cases of variants have been confirmed, meaning BC has now hit 200 in total. Sadly, another 7 people have died from COVID-19. 542 more cases are confirmed, and BC is now just under 4,700 active cases. Hospitalizations are now at their highest in a month, with 64 people in critical or intensive care. Complaints are mounting about mandatory quarantine stays for travelers returning to Canada. Some people claim the conditions are unjust. As Isabel Ragim tells us, they feel the process is more of a hotel cash grab than a safety measure.
Inhumane would be my main word.
Steve Thurgood doesn't hold back describing his mandatory hotel stopover in Richmond. He returned to BC after spending the last 4.5 months at sea working on a freighter. Even there, he says, meals were better than the cold, bland ones served at the quarantine hotel.
3 nights here was $820, which is cheaper than a lot of the hotels around here. But it's still a fair chunk of change that I wasn't expecting to spend when I came back home after 144 days at sea.
Srihari Murthy and his 8-year-old son were also unimpressed.
Yeah, hotel was like something you get into the room and you're locked.
The two flew into YVR from India last week after providing post-surgery care for the boy's grandmother. Murthy says he had to pay for a 3-night stay despite being given the okay to leave after just 1 night.
The negative results came in just 10 hours. And the problem is they're not refunding any money. Completely absurd.
Complaints have been mounting from quarantine travelers across the country since the rules came into effect. Some say they were told to wait in rooms with dozens of other travelers.
I've interacted at that point with more than 50 people. So what was the point?
Steve Thurgood also got to leave his hotel after just 1 night, but has to pay for 3. He believes hotels are reaping the benefits.
I think they're jumping on the bandwagon and they see this as a little bit of a cash cow, because typically within 48 hours for sure, everyone gets their test results back.
When asked about growing complaints, Health Canada didn't address specifics, but says hotel stopovers are non-refundable and that the Public Health Agency of Canada is in daily contact with hotels to support their needs. Travelers like Thurgood believe there has to be a better way to protect Canadians without the unnecessary hotel costs and chaos. Isabel Regam, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Vancouver Island mother of 2 young girls who were killed by her ex-spouse on Christmas Day is speaking publicly in her first TV interview. Sarah Cotton Elliott says she wants to bring attention to changes in divorce law which could have saved her daughters' lives. Mira Baines explains.
The fact that family violence and coercive control is now written into national legislation is a huge step forward in family law. And surprisingly, it hasn't been in there before. And it should have been in there a long time ago.
Sarah Cotton Elliott is speaking out on video for the first time since her daughter's 6-year-old Chloe and 4-year-old Aubrey were killed in an Oak Bay apartment. Her former common-law spouse murdered them on Christmas Day during their visit with him. As part of new divorce law rules, courts must now also consider the presence of family violence in the context of making parenting and contact arrangements.
I didn't realize that none of it was in there when I was going through family court in 2016. But when the judge made her decision, it was very evident that she was not taking those types of things into account when making her decision.
They are the first major changes to divorce law in more than 20 years. It's too late in Cotton Elliott's case, but she wants other women to be aware that family violence includes sexual abuse, harassment, psychological abuse, and financial abuse.
I would hope that changes like this could have changed the outcome, I don't know for sure if they would have, but I think the language has been changed within the new Divorce Act, which I think is important. It's meant to be less adversarial.
In 2016, when Cotton Elliott's custody dispute went before the court, her former spouse owed nearly $30,000 in child support. During the trial, the mother testified that back in 2013, that her former spouse threatened to blow up the house if he didn't get a breakdown of what happened to a child care benefit check. She said he looked angry and crazed. She testified that 2 days later, he pinned her to the bed and she called police. A restraining order was issued. Cotton Elliott says support from family, her community in Victoria, and strangers has helped her through the immeasurable loss of her 2 little girls. She remarried in Tofino during the COVID-19 pandemic.
There's always going to be an immense void in my life. But I'm so blessed. I have a wonderfully supportive husband. I have 3 beautiful stepchildren. And I have a family and friends who have supported me throughout this. So I feel taken care of. And but I miss them every minute of every day.
Loss that she hopes can now be avoided for other women battling an abusive former spouse. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
Friends and family have identified the woman who died in a head-on collision in North Vancouver last night. Marcelina Perdido Agule is being remembered as a mother, grandmother, and a beloved teacher and community member. Friends say she was picking up her husband from work when an Audi crossed the center line and crashed into them. Her husband is still in the hospital in critical condition. The male driver of the Audi has serious but non-life-threatening injuries. RCMP say alcohol and speed may be a factor. Mounties are investigating dangerous operation of a motor vehicle and refusal to provide a breath sample. The NDP has announced new legislation targeting gang members. The goal is to make it harder for them to buy, transport, or possess real and imitation firearms.
This legislation will help to ensure our police agencies have additional tools to be able to prevent crime, disrupt organized crime groups, and gather evidence in support of successful prosecutions.
Changes will include penalizing drivers who transport illegal firearms and stopping gang members from using shooting ranges. It would also prohibit people from having real or fake firearms in places like schools and hospitals. Well, Meng Wanzhou and her lawyers were back in court today arguing she's the victim of political interference. The Huawei executive's lawyers are accusing former U.S. President Donald Trump of leaving a stain on the Canadian justice system. His threats to intervene in extradition proceedings in pursuit of a trade deal, they argue, reduces Meng to an object rather than a human being. They want the case dismissed over abuse of process. The Crown characterizes those arguments as thin, accusing Meng lawyers of taking comments made by American and Canadian officials out of context. A decision on the extradition request isn't expected until much later this year. Thousands of First Nations people have been vaccinated in BC, but the rollout hasn't been flawless. Next, a first-hand look at One Nation's experience. And thanks so much for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Police in St. John's are investigating an incident between a landlord and his tenants that ended with a plow breaking through a house. As Ryan Cook reports, the landlord said it was an accident, while his tenant believes otherwise.
I am not moving my car. You are not moving it with this machine.
Corey Monk jumped on top of his car. It was sitting in his driveway when his landlord, Robert Regular, advanced forward with a backhoe and began pushing the car backwards. What isn't clearly captured is the moment the plow strikes the house where Monk and his girlfriend live. These frantic moments caught on camera by Corey Monk will now be turned over to the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary investigators.
The window was taken out. Obviously, there's glass everywhere. The whole bottom floor now is
and as you can see,
months before all of this, Regular served his tenants with an eviction notice for late payment of October's rent. The couple says they paid the rent before the eviction date, which would legally mean they get to stay. But Regular argues they haven't paid the full amount, and a dispute resolution hearing has been delayed for months.
We've been stuck between a rock and a hard place for a very long time. And because of COVID, everything is slowed down with the tenancy board, you know, with the city, with everything. So that's completely understandable. But because it slowed down, our landlord decided to take the law into his own hands this morning.
I spoke with Regular earlier today and he declined an interview, but he did say he never intended to threaten the tenants or strike the house, which would force them to leave. He says he was trying to push back snow from the side of the house so he could access the roof to do repairs. The tenants didn't believe him and refused to move the car. Regular says he only intended to push the car back and striking the house was just an accident. So what's going through your mind as all this is going on?
Fear.
Fear, yeah.
Scared. I don't want to leave here. We have animals in our house.
I've been afraid to leave the property for months because I don't know. I was fearful that something like this would happen when we weren't here.
Before police arrived, Monk says he tried to stop Regular from leaving the property. He admits he jumped on Regular's vehicle, which Regular says resulted in a smashed windshield. The tenants want their landlord charged with endangering their safety and threatening them, and the landlord wants his tenants charged with damaging his truck. It's an ugly situation that both sides say could have been avoided with a dispute resolution hearing. Ryan Cook, CBC News, St. John's.
And we will be right back in a few moments with more local and national news, so stay with us. As the province enters phase 2 of its vaccination plan already, more than 24,000 Indigenous people in 113 rural and remote communities have been immunized. But the rollout hasn't been without setbacks. Angela Starrett got a first-hand look at one First Nations community that recently welcomed the vaccine.
They've been anticipating it all year. Now they're giving the life-saving vaccine and the nurses who carry it a ceremony.
I'm super happy for our community to be able to receive the vaccination today. You know, we have had a challenging year.
Chief Grace George's sister died of COVID-19 just this January. She wishes she could have been able to access the vaccine. Because of their efforts to socially distance, this community only saw a relatively small outbreak. But it's taken a toll.
Gathering is one of our biggest
most valued things that we do as a community. So it's definitely caused a lot of anxiety and stress for everyone.
It's breeze, huh? She was among the first in the Katzie First Nation to be vaccinated, a day they won't forget.
It's the beginning of the end of this pandemic.
So far in BC, more than 19,000 Indigenous people in rural and remote communities got the first dose, and almost 5,500 the second. But the rollout hasn't always been smooth. Indigenous communities have faced racism from those who don't understand why they were prioritized. The Nechako Lakes MLA posted to social media asking why First Nations ages 18 plus were getting the vaccine in phase 1, but not non-Indigenous people nearby. And at the start of phase 1, BC health officials apologized for taking away vaccine meant for the Newhall. There's also been miscommunication from health authorities. Some First Nations only found out through the media that their second dose was delayed when the province changed the interval between doses. While Katzie leaders tell me there was some vaccine hesitancy initially, 80% of this community was vaccinated in the end. Still, there are outstanding concerns about when vulnerable community members living in the city will be vaccinated.
Our off-reserve members are very much connected to our on-reserve families, and I would have loved to have had the opportunity to provide this vaccination to them as well.
And she isn't the only one.
It doesn't matter where they are. It doesn't matter if they're urban, rural, remote. They're still at increased risk.
About 78% of all Indigenous people in BC don't live on reserves. The Ministry of Health says it's vaccinating Indigenous people off reserve age 65 plus in phase 2. Angela Sterrett, CBC News, Katzie Territory near Pet Meadows.
The first shipment of the recently approved COVID-19 vaccine from AstraZeneca has arrived in Canada. 500,000 doses were delivered today. Some of it will be heading here to BC. The Prime Minister says this ensures the vaccination timetable can be met, maybe even earlier than expected.
We expect all Canadians to be vaccinated by the end of September for those who want it. We are seeing, however, an increase in the number of vaccines coming into Canada, as we had hoped for. It's possible that those timelines be moved forward, and we're certainly going to work closely with the provinces in order to try and get to that, to get vaccinations to Canadians as quickly as possible so that we can loosen and reopen as quickly as possible.
BC has said it may use the AstraZeneca vaccine for frontline essential workers, including first responders, teachers, and those working at food processing plants. Canada is also expecting to receive about 445,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine this week. And here is a live shot of Cambie Street. And, a few wet days ahead, but a break is on the way. Stay with us. We'll have your full forecast after the break.
As theaters continue to remain shuttered in Manitoba, the Royal Winnipeg Ballet has found a way to keep its 81st season going. The RWB will be showcasing Visions of Swan Lake online in a new digital performance that audiences will be able to watch from their couch.
And of course, we had to make it smaller and put it on the small screen for everybody. Swan Lake was on our roster of ballets that we were going to perform at the concert hall. So we thought that it was a great ballet just to pivot into a digital film form. It's very iconic, it's classic, it's something that the dancers really need to do in their repertoire.
The RWB partnered with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra for the show. The production, filmed at the Centennial Concert Hall in February, was done under strict public health guidelines. RWB Associate Artistic Director Tara Burtwhistle says the ballet remains true to itself, still featuring the iconic music, characters, and storyline, but with a twist.
The changes also include the addition of masks to the costumes, which were all handmade by our in-house wardrobe department. And you'll also notice that the same role is played by multiple dancers. That's so that the dancers have been working in cohorts so that it reflects the casting of Swan Lake.
The season hasn't been the same for the RWB. The ballet has been forced to move performances online. Classes and auditions were also done virtually. Chen Xin Liu plays the evil Black Swan in the production.
This is kind of challenge part for me to make myself to look mean and then recover the half face. So all I can do is only the eye part and then the upper part of my face. So I think I might, like for my eye, I need to do more.
The soloist says she enjoyed filming the ballet, but she misses live performances.
It is quite different. Like usually we perform on stage and I got more nervous and the audience is there and they clap for you. So that's totally different energy. And now we are faced to the cameras. We have 3 cameras. So I felt like I was more relaxed. I'm still prefer the on stage, the nervous part.
Visions of Swan Lake will feature 6 shows that will air on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays starting this weekend and running till March 14th. Tickets for the digital performance can be purchased on the Royal Winnipeg Ballet website. Marjorie Dowhouse, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The weather is brought to you by Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. We test so it runs. It's hard to stop a train.
It's time to take a look at our forecast. Johanna is on assignment today, but we have the wonderful Nick Cernkovich with us today. So how is it looking?
Well, it's looking a little wet, Tina, but it's only going to last a few days. And after that, we're actually back into sunshine and warm weather to boot. Temperatures going to be above the seasonal mark once again as we head into next week. So good looking forecast in the long term. A little bit of rain to get through in the short term. This is the system that we're watching here. Over the last couple of days, it's basically been pushing sort of just north of Tofino, but that whole system begins to break down tomorrow and round about the supper hour, about 6 p.m. or so is when we're looking at rain showers starting in the Vancouver area, snow through the higher elevations, a little bit sooner out toward Vancouver Island. That continues through Friday and into the weekend. A good deal of snow, by the way, in places like the Sea to Sky, and then as you head further inland across the Columbia Mountain Range, we're looking at upwards to about 60 centimeters of fresh snow with this thing as we head through Saturday. Rainfall, though, in the lower elevations. So a little bit of a messy system coming up for the next few days. In terms of how much you can expect, it's not an unusual amount. In terms of rain, we're looking at, in the Vancouver area, about 30, 40 millimeters through Saturday. Sunday, maybe add another 10 to 15 millimeters or so. But after that, it dries out as we head into next week. Winds are going to be a bit of a factor. We've got winds along the coast by tomorrow morning gusting to close to 100 kilometers per hour. Even in the Vancouver area, we're looking at winds that could be gusting 40, 50 kilometers per hour through tomorrow. So something to watch there. We've got a few wind warnings that are in effect here, and I suspect we might see a few more of those popping up as we head through tomorrow. There's a look at the provincial forecast as we head a little bit closer there. Temperatures above seasonal, rainfall moving in as we head through the afternoon hours. Long range forecast, double-digit temperatures again tomorrow for Vancouver at 11 degrees. Rain showers starting around the supper hour. We've got some 8s in there as we head into the weekend, but by Monday we've got sunshine back again, and in fact double digits once more through mid next week. Yeah.
All right, so a couple of wet days, but we will be rewarded. Thank you so much.
You bet.
And that is it for us here on this Wednesday. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, whether it's online or through the television. For news at any time, you can always go to our website, cbc.ca/BC. I'll be back again here tomorrow, so hope to see you then. Good night.